On this program, a roundtable discussion on global poverty with representatives from World Vision, the Brookings Institution, Oxfam America, and the Republic of Niger. Madam Ambassador, I'll start with you, all right? Paint a picture for us. So what comes to your mind when I use the phrase global poverty? What comes to your mind, and specifically in your own country?
What comes in my mind are women, children, people living in rural areas, people living in urban areas, but really in the periphery, people who cannot have 3 meals in a day, people who cannot decide for themselves, and people sometimes who have desperation. This is what comes in my mind when I hear poverty.
Desperation.
Desperation.
Talk a little bit about that a little further.
For me, desperation is when you cannot decide what tomorrow can be. And you don't see anything but a wall, in spite of your own will to do something. So that's, for me, poverty, particularly deep poverty. I would like to think that it's something that is not necessarily internal, inherited to the person, but something that the environment, there is no enabling environment, then you find yourself in a predicament. So this is, and many women in the world, and particularly in Africa, find themselves in this situation, and children find themselves in this situation.
Greg, your organization uses the word injustice in related to poverty.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that, and what picture comes to your mind?
Well, I think the picture the ambassador just painted is very much like what we see when in the countries where we work. We don't find that poverty is first and foremost a lack of stuff. In fact, it's a lack of rights. It's a lack of power to actually make decisions and have control over your life and the ability of people in your household to be able to take care of their own needs. So we often find that the barriers that people face are less because they don't have something today like food or health care. It's because they lack the voice and they lack the ability to be able to demand access to those types of public services from their governments. So it really rests on trying to help citizens to claim their rights and demand that their governments behave responsibly and govern effectively, and supporting governments to be able to be responsive to that demand. Too many governments in the developing world simply lack the resources to hold up their end of the bargain.
Amadou, what your IMF work, your work at Brookings, Africa, what picture comes into your mind?
Well, first of all, I would agree with Madam Ambassador and everybody so far that when you think about poverty, you think about not being in charge of your own destiny, having totally no say in your destiny. That's number one. But also to me, when I hear the word poverty, I'm thinking maybe the greatest challenges of our time, and I'm thinking challenges and solutions and the fact that we really have to address this challenge.
So, give me a human picture that you can recall out of your own background, out of your own experience, that makes it real for someone.
Well, for me, it's just like where I come from, Senegal, from Dakar, and where I live next to the university, which is a nice neighborhood. But at night, you would see the students, for example, going under the public lights in order to study. The hospitals not having power outages, and suddenly everybody having to go to another place and maybe a private clinic in order to get the treatment they need. So it's just this lack of having no say in your future that I think is terrible.
Ken, When I asked for that human picture, you were quick to bring out your phone. And I'm going to ask if we can shoot take it out and show me the picture that you showed me that brings home, and tell me the story behind it.
All right.
Let's see. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Now, I pulled this up because when I met the ambassador from Niger, I recalled that 2.5 years ago when I went on a World Vision trip there, we visited a feeding site. And we had the privilege of seeing a mother with a child that was near death, and World Vision was feeding this child. And I was so struck by the human face of poverty in that sense, of hunger, staring right back. I've never been able to take it off my iPhone. As it turned out, my own daughter was giving birth at that time to a healthy child here. And I sent her that picture and I said, Jennifer, not all mothers are as fortunate as you. It really brought home to me that statistics about poverty are frightening, but it's the face of poverty, one child at a time, that brings it home to you.
So it's a lot of different things at the same time. It's electricity, it's sanitation, it's injustice, it's food, it's desperation. It's hard for us, I think, here in America to wrap our minds around, or our arms around, the idea that so many people are, what is it, a third of the world's population? A billion people are living on $1.25 a day or something like that. What would $1.25 a day bring you here in the United States? What could it bring you?
Well, it's hard to make a direct comparison there. And one of the things that I think it's important to remember about poverty, it's incredibly specific to the particular context in which somebody lives. And too often, when we try to think of global solutions, we revert to silver bullet solutions that aren't tailored to the particular context that somebody lives in. What's most important, I think, and what most research around poverty has found, that what frustrates people most is the trade-offs that they're forced to make. Having to choose between food or medicine, having to choose which child actually gets the chance to go to school and which child has to stay home, or even deciding which family member gets to eat on a particular day. Mm-hmm. It's those kind of choices that those of us who are more fortunate don't have to face on a regular basis. That's really the defining feature of poverty.
Choice.
It's the lack of choice. It's the lack of power over your own situation, lack of control, and the loss of dignity.
Let me take a little break. Loss of dignity. We want to talk about that in a minute. We'll take a little break as we open our program. We've gathered folks from Brookings and from Oxfam and from World Vision and the ambassador representing the Republic of Niger, all to talk about this subject of global poverty. It's a program that we've wanted to do for a long time. So sit tight. I'll be back on the other side. Get me out of the way so it's your conversation, not mine. This is America and the World. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. Tourism, Malaysia. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Panama Tourism Authority. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services. Let's talk about causes of poverty. And one of the things that I picked up in my reading is it could be governments, it could be corruption, it could be exploitation, it could be just individual greed, but it could be also just circumstances. So get me out of the way and talk a little bit about the causes and the effects of living in poverty. Go ahead.
Well, I really appreciate the way that you immediately began by talking about the root causes, because so often our discussion will involve what there's a paucity of, what there's an absence of, water or food or medicine, and that's all true, but those are all symptoms of something else that's gone wrong. You used the phrase the justice, or we're World Vision, we talk about advocating, but we know that if you just provide things, you don't necessarily create a sustainable solution. So you got to think about root causes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think too often in the United States, our view of poverty in the developing world is that it's a lack of stuff. That people don't have enough stuff. They don't have health care, they don't have education, they don't have food. And if we in the wealthy North just give them those things, then they won't be poor anymore. And in fact, we've had a history of giving people stuff for a long time. Giving people stuff is not the main problem. What we need to do is we need to be working more with them to help them achieve their rights. And increasingly, I think you see donors doing this, I think you see governments doing this, and I think you see the civil society community, whether it's international NGOs like Oxfam and World Vision, or local civil society organizations, understanding that what they really need to do is help people gain more of a voice to demand accountability from their governments.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think we have to look at the root causes. Certainly when you take the case of Africa or Niger, people are not expecting handout. Because when you give, you are disempowering the person, because you are not giving the person an opportunity to empower themselves so that they can fetch for themselves. So for us, empowerment, I would like in our context to talk about empowerment. When you look at communities where education is taking place, people know what they need, they know what they want, and when they're educated and there is training in the community, they learn to make choices that are sustainable. Because when you give, it's for one time. Are you going to give for the whole time? But if you to teach someone to fish for themselves, you empower them for the whole their lifespan, and this is something. And so, what are the people's priority? To recognize that communities knows their own priorities, but what communities are expecting is a system of government, system of the civil society or the private sector, which can come in and support them to think through their priorities and their choices, and to help them and to skill them so that they can take over, they can take charge of their priorities.
You're very good in your organization about going in and asking people questions, right? Before,
well, you know, we
ask questions and make evaluations?
Well, that's true. In fact, we believe so strongly that the community has to be involved in solutions that will take up to a year and a half, meeting with the community to decide what to do over a 15-year project, because they have to have ownership of it. When we leave in 15 years, if we can, they've got to be able to keep the solutions going. If we provide water, for example, and we're about to provide our number 1,000th borehole in Niger, the key to that project will be in 10 years when we come back, are the boreholes still functioning? And that will depend on whether there's a community ownership of it where they're charging a little fee, they can do the repairs, etc. But if it's just outsiders coming in, it will not last.
What's a borehole?
Borehole where you get down to the water so you can bring it up and make it available to people.
And is it a well or is
it's a well. It can be different lengths, etc. We do, you do what we call software projects, which is sanitation and hygiene and things like that. But you also try to provide the water itself. But again, you can't just do it as an outsider.
So when we're talking about poverty, we're also talking about water We're talking about sanitation, we're talking about, and then the spillover to healthcare and education, and it just keeps going on and on. Amadou, let me ask you this question. If you, and I think we covered this on the last program that we did on Africa, that you were kind enough to sit in on, Africa and many countries moving toward great success, yet this poverty thing is still not making as much progress as one would hope, huh?
Yeah, so I would first of all, the facts are there. It's true that the number of poor people in Africa is still approximately the same, I think about 400 million people. And in part, it's because of the demographic trends. Although we've done progress in reducing the rate of poverty, we're having a population which is increasing, so the number of poor has not really declined. That's one. Number two, we're coming from a long, long way, so it's more difficult to reduce poverty when you are really, really far, far away from this $1.25 limit. And second, the inequalities also were much more pronounced. So these three reasons are such that the number of poor people has not decreased in Africa. But I want to stress that when you look at who is financing the fight against poverty in Africa, it's first and foremost the government themselves. If you look at the pie, how much dollars are going into financing development, financing the fight against poverty, it's the government themselves. Then you have the supplement of aid money, and even now, if you look at official aid money coming from the richest countries, which have pledged to put 0.7% of their gross national income, very few are really respecting that commitment, right? And private sector money and remittances are now higher than official development aid going to Africa. So that brings me back to what Madam Ambassador had said. First and foremost, it's an African problem, and first and foremost, you need then all the stakeholders, the poor, the population at large, the opposition and the government to come to basically a plan really to reduce poverty, a consensual plan.
Yeah,
We would go ahead, Greg.
Well, I was just going to say, I think this is a very important point. That for too long, I think, in the international development field, we've tried to do an end run around governments that we thought were less effective or not responding to their citizens. And we tried to sometimes, I think, pretend that those governments didn't exist. As Dr. C laid out, there's no solution to poverty that doesn't involve getting those governments to actually govern effectively and accountably. And that means that they have to be spending their own budgets and resources. There's a lot we can do as donors to help, to assist in that process. But ultimately, the solution is going to come when we are able to help citizens in those countries demand that their own governments govern effectively and spend those resources wisely.
I want to jump in, but Madam Ambassador, go ahead.
I want to jump in. Following what you just said, in terms of accountability, we want government which are accountable. One example of good practice in terms of cooperation between two governments, I like, for example, the approach that the Millennium Challenge Corporation is taking. You don't get aid or support, financing, just because you are identified as a poor country. You get support through the Millennium Challenge Corporation because there is a framework, there is a scorecard which says that human rights, do you have good governance? There are certain benchmarks that you have to be able to reach so that one can say, well, this country really has the setup. It's a favorable environment. So I think, for me, this is an incentive for government to improve good governance, to prioritize, and to involve the community in looking at the process. And for me, if every development organization providing support to government has this type of framework, then we create a context where there is a transparency. The funds are financed for this over this period of time, and this is how we're going to monitor, this is how we're going to evaluate, and the beneficiaries are also part of the process. And so that, for me, I think this is the type of approach that we need to, but we need to recognize that it is the role of the government to ensure that the people have decent living conditions and they're empowered.
Let me put this on the table, because what you've both said is what I see from afar, good news and bad news. The key, you say, is governments to help the poor. You've got to have that operational. But is this not true, that so many of the governments are corrupt and are taking the money that comes in and not giving services to the poor, not improving the infrastructure of the company, but keeping it at the top level? Yes.
Just this thing about Africa and corruption, it's just like Africa doesn't have the
corruption. We were just in Panama, and the vice president in Panama said the difference between the rulers and the people is the single biggest problem in Latin America.
But I would just say in some surveys like Transparency International, a number of African countries fare better than Russia, China, even India. So just for the...
Yeah, I do think that the challenge is really about how you...
I don't know if I'm going to let you skate on that one. I don't know if I'm going to let you skate.
No, well, come back
You
to
can't
that.
say that the reason for poverty existing is because there's more people being born.
You see, the fact is, I don't like the word poverty. I like the word wealth creation, opportunity.
Oh, please.
Opportunity creation.
Do you know that we will have an election in the United States in 2016 where the word poverty is never mentioned?
But let me tell you, I think why I'm insisting on opportunities rather than poverty is to look forward and really focus on what can be done. What are the policies that can be done really to give people an opportunity to escape poverty? Right. And so if you look at the literature, you have this strand of literature that's saying economic growth is useful in helping reduce poverty, right? So the issue is there's no one single recipe to have fast and sustained economic growth. So, but Africa has been growing very fast in the past 15, 20 years. And it's having trickle-down effect. The problem is that the population is growing. So for a 5% economic growth with a 2% or 3% population growth, you end up with a 2% GDP per capita growth, right? So that's one. But economic growth is helping us. Another literature is saying, well, you have to look at the sector, right? So agricultural growth will help reduce poverty. Why? Because that's where most of the poor people are, right? And then you have all this literature looking at different issues, all the way to impact evaluation and saying what intervention work, and then the issue of how to you scale the interventions that work. So I'd rather that we focus on what can be done to escape poverty, to give people opportunity, and so on. My point is that really we are far from the Ethiopia, saved. What is it again? That song. We are the world. Africa is changing, and we are not beggars. And now we really want to transform and to make a real change. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, I want to follow up on what Dr. C said. For me, when you look at in the 90s, we came and we say, well, the governments are very weak, the governments are corrupt, etc., etc. Let's empower the civil society. But who is the civil society in a context like Africa? To what extent the national civil society is accountable to the people? In a context where you have democracy, you elect people to come to government and to come to the National Assembly. They are endowed by the people to enact laws and to develop programs by which we are going to really evaluate their performance at the end of a cycle. And the role of the civil society is not to be competing against government, but rather to be working with the government, and so that those programs for which governments a particular government is elected, that this program are.
How are you defining the civil society?
For me, the civil society are individuals which are not working for the government, but they decide to support government activities.
For information about This is America and the World, and to watch all of our programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, and look for us on Facebook and Twitter. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. Tourism Malaysia. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Panama Tourism Authority. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.